All right, so I'm just going to briefly cover how to hold a riding whip, because it comes up a lot when I work with people. Spurs, when you use spurs, you have to move your leg bones in a way that can destabilize your seat as a rider. And spurs are not as good as whips if you're actually trying to build pushing force in your horse, engage the hindquarters, and get them to push from behind. So my preferred tool is a whip over spurs. But a lot of people don't carry a whip because it's cumbersome and it's heavy. So all whips come with a handle, and we all grab the handle like this, and then we try to use the whip like that. And we usually send the horse flying forward because we're out of control with the whip. So I have 4 different dressage whips, and a dressage whip is a very long whip. I have 4 different handles, so I'm just going to show you quickly, no matter the style of the whip, and a dressage whip is long enough that if you're really working on the horse's balance, when you tap lightly, it's sort of like tapping someone on the shoulder. If I want somebody's attention, I tap lightly on the shoulder and their attention goes to where I touched. That's how a whip is supposed to work. So holding a whip is the tricky part for most people, especially these long dressage whips, which I actually prefer if I'm training a horse and helping the horse balance or develop through the basics. So let's take whip number 1. And the way on every whip, it comes with a handle, but you never hold the handle. So most people are gripping it like this. But every whip, if you turn it sideways and you sort of balance it lightly on the top of your fingertips, so palm up, and you're going to look for where on this whip does the weight of the whip start to equalize, or I could kind of balance it on just my 2 fingers, like that. That's where you hold the whip. That's what makes the whip light and easy to maneuver. And the reason dressage whips are long is because you're holding the whip like this, right? So when I hold the whip while I'm riding, if I'm in my riding position, this area of this particular whip is the balance point of the whip. So you find the balance point, kind of searching on there for where does the whip balance on my 2 fingers. There, right? So about there is where I want my hand, well below the handle on this particular whip. So then I'm going to wrap my fingers around one side. But instead of my thumb going there, I want my thumb on the whip, like that, right? So I hold the whip loosely with my fingers with the thumb on top. When I'm riding, the base of the whip lays across my thigh in the saddle, and the front of the whip, on this particular whip, is going to be right in front of me, crossing the horse's withers. So then when I need the whip, I don't have to reach back and touch. For some horses, all I have to do is tap my own leg. So it's just a little flick of the wrist that moves. I hardly have to move my elbow or shoulder. If I want to touch the horse's hind leg, then I'm going to rotate from my shoulder, right? So as I rotate the whip from my shoulder, my elbow doesn't have to change, my wrist doesn't have to change, and you can see I'm definitely touching the hindquarters, right? So I'm not having to pull on the rein a lot. My rein is going outward a little, but it's not pulling backwards in order to use the whip. I'm here with my hands, thumbs on top, the whip at the balance point, resting easily on my fingertips. I don't have to grip, I don't have to tighten my arm, right? So a little tap like that could support my leg aid, or if I need a bigger touch, I can just open the rein outward. I don't have to change anything, I don't pull backwards on the horse, and the back of the whip automatically touches the horse. So there I'm exaggerating. So then let's look at a couple of different whips. Right? Again, if I hold it on the handle and I grab with my thumb this way, the whip feels incredibly heavy and I have to tighten my arm just to use it, right? And it's not in great control. So when I go to find the balance point on the whip, this one is a little closer to the actual handle, right? So my thumb is going to be maybe at the base of the handle on the whip, and you can bend the knuckle. My fingers will be wrapped around. I did not do a manicure. And so this whip is going to be held, again, with most of the handle coming across the front. The whip resting on my thigh while I'm riding, so I'm not influencing the horse. These big fuzzy wiggly things on the end can cause some horses to move forward, because even if the whip is still, those will be moving. So if your horse is super sensitive to a whip in the first place, don't use those. If your horse doesn't like to go forward and is a little dull to the whip, those little wiggly bits can help, because the horse sees the motion. So with a light leg aid, those things are always wiggling around and, in a sense, driving the horse forward, touching, sort of influencing the hindquarter. So again, I can just do this with a long whip, and I'm already touching the horse's flank, the back of the barrel. If I want to actually touch the hind leg to initiate forward, it's just rotating my shoulder, right? So my hand, my forearm, nothing changes, it just goes out. And that would touch the horse on this length of whip. That's a lot of movement to stimulate forward from the back end. If I'm using spurs, all the energy is right here. I'm pushing the horse left and right. I'm not actually tapping the horse on the shoulder, so to speak, or tapping on the hind leg, saying, start the motion from here. That's the advantage of a whip, is it's proprioceptive. You're just touching on the hindquarters, saying, hey, start from here. Start forward motion from here. So then let's look at this whip. Little light handle. Ooh, but it's a thick shaft, right? So the balance point, the balance point is way down here, right? So this whip here, the whip feels light, it's easy to maneuver. Here, oops, and this is the number one reason that riders tell me they hate whips, is because they're holding it here or they're holding it here, they've got their thumb wrapped around, and all of a sudden my arm is tight, I can't control it, and I really don't have great refinement or control over the use of the whip. It's a big gesture where my whole forearm is moving or my wrist is going in and out, and then the end of the whip is a little out of control. So there's a balance point or a fulcrum on every whip that is rarely on the handle. It's almost always below the handle. So I go, I don't know why they even put handles on them, because that's not where you hold the whip, right? So the last one, this one is one of my favorite whips, and it's one of my favorites because it's actually balanced pretty close to the handle, right? So it's how they do the shaft and the weight and the handle. It's a whole design of the whip that knowing that people will probably grab the handle, the better designed whips, their balance point is very close to the handle. So, and you can see this is quite a steady whip. So it's a well-balanced whip, where some of the other ones were hard to balance on my fingertips. So this whip, I'm basically going to hold right at the base of the handle, right? If I hold it up here, it's still going to feel heavy and awkward. But if I hold it here and put my thumb on the whip, right? So I'll demonstrate this another time actually in saddle with reins, because your thumb goes on top of the reins. And with the whip hand, the rein goes between the whip and your thumb. The rein goes under the whip goes over the rein, your thumb goes on the whip. But you're controlling the rein and the whip at the same time with very loose fingers and a very light feeling in your hand. So it's not influencing your rein contact, it's not influencing your aids, which is where people hate whips. And so when I find that balance point on the whip feels very, very light. I can carry it with loose fingers, just here, right? And then when I use it, again, notice that the hand, the wrist, the forearm, the elbow, nothing's really moving other than my shoulder joint, way up here. So as I rotate the ball in the socket on my shoulder, I just take my rein a little, I'm really exaggerating it, my rein would not go this far to touch the horse. But it's just this move, a little opening by rotating the shoulder joint, and bam, you're touching the hindquarters lightly. That's as hard of a touch as you ever need. Just something light. Because if I went to a person with a whip and I'm touching here and I'm touching there, all it does, like a magic wand, is bring the energy, bring the attention to the spot that you touch, right? So I don't want a whip that has a real whippy action and a sound of whipping. I want something sort of sturdy and stiff, because I just want it to be an extension, as if I could reach back and touch with my fingers. But if I touch with my fingers, I have to take my hands off the reins. So the whip does the same thing. It just lightly touches the hindquarter while it doesn't disturb the rein contact.